Hello everyone and everything, and welcome back to more Hollow Knight. In the last episode, I don't want to talk about it. And in this episode, I believe it is a good time for us to return once more back to Godhome. In our last visit, we struggled a little bit, but we did manage to best both of these pantheons, and we have 1/3 pantheon to take on today, the Pantheon of the Sage. But I have decided that, much like before, we're going to do the practice round against all of the bosses in the Pantheon first, and then tackle the Pantheon itself next episode. And real fast, before we dive head in, I do want to once again draw attention to what is required here, at least as far as the percentage completion in this game. See, none of what we're doing down here in the Hall of Gods contributes to those percentages whatsoever. It's basically just here for practice for the Pantheons. The Pantheons themselves, hello Zote, are the thing that we are here earning our percentage points for. And our first boss on the docket is the Hive Knight. Of course, like every scaling HP foe we fought in the game, here in Godhome, his HP does not scale to your nail. He's at 850, which is less than his possible maximum if you had fought him back in the Hive with jeez. If you'd fought him back in the Hive with the maximum upgraded nail. I don't know why I keep doing the upward one. But overall, still pretty simple. Now, he does have a bit of an interesting change here in the Ascended difficulty fight. Apart from having much more HP, he now begins the fight in his last phase, or having all of his attacks available to him, including the bees and the spike bursts. Now, what's special about the bees is that now that we have the Abyss Shriek, we can actually make slight use of the fact that the bees can be destroyed with spells. At least more so than we could before, since we can use the Abyss Shriek to take down any that are coming down above us. It doesn't help too much, and I'd still recommend using Descending Dark more, but it is definitely an option. And now on to the most rad of Radiance. As usual, the only change from Ascended is the damage that he does, which is of course unlimited. And while we're doing a relatively simple boss fight here, I do think I want to talk a little bit more about how the Radiant boss fights fit into my difficulty formula. Because obviously, for those of you who have stuck around long enough, and for those of you who did your homework and actually read all my notes on the subject way back when we covered Hornet, you may recall that damage is multiplied onto the rest of the formula to get the overall difficulty stat. And obviously, if I multiplied infinity onto the formula, then every single Radiant boss would be infinitely difficult. So, strictly speaking, for the purposes of the difficulty formula, I'm calculating the Radiant boss fights at doing 9 damage, or the maximum number of masks you can have. Goodness gracious! And technically, even though that's the most normal masks we can have, they can do much more damage than that with a single hit. The actual damage value coded into the game is unknown to me, but they can take you all the way down, even if you maximize your health with Lifeblood, going all the way across the screen. But because they do infinite damage, you'd have no reason to prepare for them with Lifeblood. Jeez, be careful of those last few bees. So the most damage, unless you're doing something completely irrelevant, that they would be doing to you is 9. Therefore, I've chosen the number 9. Maybe a little arbitrary, but it works for me. Our next foe is back upstairs, one of the Dream Warriors, Elder Dreamborn God of Travelers and Sages. And my goodness, is this the easiest that one of our upgrades makes one of these bosses. The Shade Cloak absolutely just dismantles Elder Huh. He is so easy to dodge. As long as you have the proper timing, none of his attacks matter to your Shade Cloak dash. It doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter even if your timing isn't dead on, it's really easy. And he does attack infrequently enough that he gives you more than enough time to recharge your entire Shade Cloak dash in between every attack. This poor guy. So since the Shade Cloak dash makes us basically immune to everything that he can do, the biggest problem with this fight is the waiting aspect of his second attack, this one here. The Bengal Barrage, as I believe I called it. But use that time to either maybe charge up a Nail Art or, you know, just whatever you want, honestly. Wah! And because he's just that easy now, ouch. That was my mistake. Because he's just that easy, I have very little to say, so you know what? Let's just move on to Radiant. And honestly, the only reason you should die in Radiant is either if you run into the Elder himself or get impatient. Which I almost just did both. It can be very tempting to try and use some spells and go after him a little harder than normal, just because this fight does take a minute. But as long as you're just taking things measured and easily, there is absolutely nothing he can do. And yeah, alright, yep, I mean, do as I say, not as I do, you know the old adage. It's kind of funny, because back in our first fight against him, when we didn't have Shade Cloak, I definitely consider Elder Huh to be one of the tougher of the Dream Warriors. But he basically just rolls over for us now. Back downstairs, our next fight is the Collector, Joyful God of Possession. And even though we have gotten a few extra tools at our disposal since our last fight, really nothing has changed here at all. He is a very easy boss. Just as before, stick right next to him, let him jump over your head, take out all of his jars as fast as they come down, and the whole fight will be over with extremely fast. He does have 900 HP now, more than he could have had even with his old scaling health. But that barely makes a difference because we're doing more damage than ever before, and he should be just about done. Yep, there he is. It actually let me do an extra hit on him from the look of things there. That was odd. However, before covering his Ascended form, I want to go ahead and take off all my charms, because he gets a pretty significant change in his Ascended boss fight. And I want to really illustrate how much of a difference it makes when we go in without strength. So starting off, all seems normal until he summons his first enemy. Basically, all three of the enemies he can summon have been upgraded. Now instead of Balders, he gets Sharp Balders. Instead of Squits, he gets Armored Squits, and instead of Aspids, he gets Primal Aspids. The biggest problem with that isn't necessarily how much more difficult those enemies are, but rather how much more damage they can take. They all have 26 health. Yikes. Which, compared to the 21 damage we do with our Pure Nail, makes it absolutely impossible to take them out with one slash unless you're using a Nail Art. This is a very big problem because of something that we're not going to see for a while, but suffice to say, I highly recommend at least being mentally prepared for practicing this fight without the charms. If you don't want to do it yet, though, of course, throwing on Fragile Strength is a big deal as far as something being really helpful against all of these fights. It basically makes it no different from the original, but obviously without the ability to take out all those foes in one hit, I'm struggling pretty big time. If you do want to take this guy out on Ascended without any charms, you are going to have to follow the advice from my bio in regards to if you have a lower power nail. And that is, once he starts summoning multiple foes per summon, start only prioritizing getting one attack each on the ones he summons. And then, whenever he goes down like this, hit him with a Dream Nail instead of a Slash to build up some soul. That way, you can use your spells to take out the otherwise overwhelming number of foes, and whittle him down just a bit easier that way. I mean, I say easier, but I'm definitely not having an easy time with this. The commitment I'm making right now, though, is to be ascended without any charms on. Ah, shoot, I was doing really well. I'm out of soul. I'm out of soul, I'm out of soul, I'm out of soul, I'm out of soul, I'm out of soul. There's so many enemies, oh my god. No. No, shoot. No! Ah, gosh. Oh! Oh, I did it. Okay. Oh, man. Okay, that particular challenge I consider to be more difficult than most of the Radiant foes that we are going to be taking on. Like, the vast majority of them. But trust me when I say it's a good skill set to have for the future. That is, if you're planning on going for journal completion the same way I am. If not, just completely ignore all of that and continue going by way of strength. So now, back in Radiant with all of the appropriate charms, including strength, this fight is going to be no more difficult than the original, since every single foe is going to die in just one hit. It basically doesn't even matter what they are and what attacks they can do and how difficult they are to avoid, because that's all there is to it. It's just one hit and done. And as long as we can stay relatively beneath them, use our longer nail to bridge the gap, perhaps in our dashes, and oops! I kind of forgot we were on Radiant, to be honest. One bright side to the changes is that he is no longer capable of summoning more than one jar at a time on Phase 1. On his Attuned difficulty, he could summon one or two on his first phase, but in Ascended and Radiant, he'll only summon one at a time, which does make it easier to use that first phase to build up soul that you're going to need in that second phase. And our next foe is right next door to him, the God Tamer. Now, the God Tamer is just a little different. They now have the exact same amount of HP, both of the duo. 750 is not a lot, though, and I think, honestly, if they really wanted to make this fight tough as an Ascended difficulty remix, they should make it so that you have to do the opposite. Give the beast infinite health, and you have to take down the Tamer, because taking down the Tamer while the beast is still active is actually genuinely difficult. And it took me a lot of tries to even get footage of that for the bio. But just taking down the beast is super duper easy. I think honestly what makes God Tamer especially difficult is the pressure. So once you get to the end of all those waves in the Colosseum, in the Trial of the Fool, you fight a boss and it's got this crazy drum beat going and the boss music starts playing and it's something you've never seen before, have no precedent for fighting. It's definitely easy to get pretty nervous and just struggle to deal with both of their attacks. But once you get past all that, they're no problem. But let's just say that nail pogos aren't your cup of tea. That's completely reasonable, even though I did say all the time, nail pogos are the key to a long life and happiness. If you're really just not feeling them, there is something else you can do, and that's going to be put on some companions. Alright, and so just basically set yourself up for a pretty easy, cheesable boss fight. All you have to do is hang up top and dash across to the other side of the screen whenever you see the beast come rolling. and all of your companions will do the rest for you. Now, mind you, this is a very, very time-consuming way to do this fight, and honestly, I think you're just better off learning the fight itself. And doing some nail pogos, but you know, if you really are just desperate to do some cheese, then this can absolutely work. I've also gone ahead and equipped Sprint Master in addition to my Weaver Song. This, ooh, alright, he got me there, he got me. Now I actually don't want to cheese him, but I did want to draw attention to the fact that equipping Sprint Master with Weaver Song makes the Weavers both move faster and do a teeny bit more damage, I believe. No, not do more damage. They jump further. Just makes them all around a little more consistent. But even that, I probably wasn't even a quarter through that boss fight with that strategy, so we're gonna go in the real way. Alright, nice. Good job. Yep. Man, he is roly-polying all over the place, which is fitting, because I think he might be a roly-poly. Ooh, that was cool. Hit him like 3 times with the same spell there. That was nice. Cool beans. Alright. Our 5th boss before the halfway point is gonna be Grim. Of course, as we've come to expect, his scaling HP no longer scales, but instead locked at 1,000, which is not bad. A fair bit for sure, but we've done much better. Probably the biggest difference is, of course, the fact that since we can't bring in any soul, he is now impossible to cheese during this phase. But by this point, we have done more than enough practice to not have to rely on that, I should say. Now, something that's kind of interesting about his stagger is that it works a little bit different than I had thought initially. Is that he actually has he doesn't have a maximum amount of time. Well, he does. He has both a maximum amount of time that he can spend staggered and a maximum amount of damage, which is pretty odd. I feel like I've gotten most of my damage just doing Shade Souls here. But now I'm out of soul, and I would like some more, sir. Alright. Thankfully, no remix or major changes here in this fight. I do want to point out that his bow is slightly different. He actually bows towards the Godseeker and not towards us, which is kind of cool. And he's another cool instance as far as his roar goes. Every single boss that we fight in this game has some kind of roar that they start the battle off with. It usually causes us to be immobile. And Grim here, he has the same thing, but he won't do it if you let him finish his bow. It's just one way where he feels a little bit more civilized than every other boss. Even the most intelligent of them, like the Mantis Lords, do some sort of like big old growl animation to start off the fight. Whoopsies. But honestly, Grim is not too much trouble for us now, especially not after we've fought his advanced Nightmare King form. And he should be just about finished now. There it is. Now, Radiant Grim definitely seems like he could be some cause for alarm. But honestly, we're gonna be just fine. Never mind. Definitely got a little greedy with the start there. It is more than possible to get 2 Dream Nails on him, which I do want to try and do. But I don't want to trigger that first big ol' pufferfish attack. Because in the grand scheme of things, even though we can get some easy spell damage to start it off, it ends up wasting a little more time than it saves. But there's no avoiding his subsequent 3-1s. But I'm finding it surprisingly easy to get some Shade Souls off in between the mayhem of all those other attacks, which is pretty cool. Wow, that was the fastest, like, quarter of that boss. Alright. I also want to point out his dream dialogue, which I haven't been reading, but has been showing up on the screen because I like getting his soul, is that this is one boss very much like Hornet, who is aware of the Godseeker setting here. I think that's really fascinating. But it does make some sense. He is some sort of transcendent being. Definitely seems to operate on a separate plane from most bugs, although that doesn't explain why Hornet is so aware. Perhaps Hornet is really just that intelligent. But I like the idea that Grimm is also super intelligent. He is not, as I've said... shoot. I was doing well there. Anyway, as I've said, he's not my favorite character in the game, but he definitely has my favorite design. He is just awesome. Got all these Phantom of the Opera vibes. I love the whole, like, red theater curtain aesthetic on anything. I love this guy. He's really giving me the runaround here. He does refer to the God-Seeker attuning process as a ritual. Shows that perhaps he has something in common with the God-Seeker. Maybe that's why he recognizes the setting so well. There he is. Okay. Not too bad. Took me a couple tries. We are definitely amping up in difficulty here, but still don't think anything's going to be more difficult than the Radiant Oblobles for a while. That being said, it's time for something I've been looking forward to, Galleon. At 650 HP, Galleon is much easier now than he was before, because we have all kinds of new abilities. One being the Abyss Shriek is extremely effective against him. The Abyss Shriek is so effective on Galleon because unlike many of the other Dream Warriors, he is not nearly as affected by knockback, so he has to basically just sit there and hold all the damage you can pour into him with it. So, the way this fight is going to go is more or less the same as I recommended, but now we can actually take him down so fast that it doesn't really become a battle of attrition and just dealing as much damage as we can before we take it, but rather dealing as much damage as we can before we take damage. At least ideally. Obviously, that's not how it's going for me in this Ascended fight, but we did still scrape out the win there. So Radiant is not, as far as Galleon, it's not about being careful, it's about being extremely fast. We're going to use all the tools at our disposal here, starting with getting a couple of Cyclone Slashes on him because we want to use these relatively easy first phase before he summons in anything else to build up some soul, and then once he starts bringing in the projectiles, we can start just wailing on him with the Abyss Shrieks. Oh, I was pretty close there. Nice! Alright, I misjudged the spacing there terribly. Having the Shade Cloak is, of course... Alright, nice. I was gonna say, having the Shade Cloak makes dodging his club way easier, because essentially we can dodge through it whether it's up in the air or on the ground. And it makes manipulating its momentum to our advantage much, much simpler. Alright, I think this might be one where we gotta use our Overcharm set, just to make all things a little bit easier as far as building up our soul. It's gonna make it easier since I'm not gonna have to be as gutsy in the first phase, just building up soul, and then we're gonna have more to expend on him in the latter phases. And I will fully admit, I haven't been using the Cyclone Slash nearly as much as I know it's possible to. I feel it's probably the most situational of all of the nail arts, but in this situation, the fact that each individual hit does count as a hit for all of the soul that you can build up is a pretty nice advantage. So this is one fight where I definitely recommend at least opening with it, even if you're not, gonna be using it too much. I'll fully admit the strategy I'm recommending is a little reckless, perhaps, and terrible. No, but I still think it's more consistent than just trying your best to dodge everything that he throws at you. He just ends up having so much projectile force, so much presence on the arena at any given time, that just straight up avoiding all four of the things moving around and paying attention to all of them is not really reasonable for the human mind. But if you can do it, definitely more powerful. Power to you. Nope. Yikes. There we go. Alright, not too bad. Almost as many tries as Collector, but each one is lightning fast, so we nailed it. Our next fight is one I know you guys have been longing to get back to. It's basically been ages since the last time we fought him. Grey Prince Zote. And don't worry too much about the fact that he has all of his titles. No, this is not the 8 damage behemoth that we took down at the end of the last episode, but rather essentially the equivalent of the 3rd fight that we did with him. He has the highest possible stagger stats, deals 1 damage, and has 1400 HP, while having all of his possible attacks. And honestly, this feels like a vacation after what we were dealing with last time. Good to at least get a refresher, but I'm sure you know full well that Radiant isn't exactly going to pull its punches any less. But it does make sense after going after him where he does 8 damage at a time. We might as well build up to doing 9. But first, his attuned fight is technically unique, even though it's almost identical to his 4th fight that we already did, just with 100 less HP. Ow. Jeez, dude. Ow. Ow. On the bright side, each repeated attempt does not require you to fall from orbit to get down to him, so it does make rematching him a lot more bearable, I would say. Not that I found the initial go-around overly frustrating, but if you were getting frustrated, the increased time between each rematch spent just falling down to the ground probably wasn't helping. There we go. Now on to Radiant. Unfortunately, this is a much bigger step up in difficulty than just one more mask. Because unfortunately, it does mean that we cannot possibly abuse the Fury of the Fallen like we did at the end of the last episode. We just have to do this perfectly. Which, if I remember correctly, I didn't have a single perfect fight last episode against any of his iterations. So despite how much practice we got, I'm not super filled with confidence here. That being said, despite how difficult of a bunch of attacks Zote has, I think his Radiant boss is one of the more approachable. Basically because the game... shoot. Like I was saying, basically because the game gives you the opportunity to build up to it steadily. Increasing mask by mask by mask does make every single small change, every single increase in difficulty become that much more approachable. I'm glad they don't do it for any other boss, because I don't want to fight every boss 10 times in a row, but it is cool. It's cool what they did here. Alright, that was awesome. Just using all the spells to avoid everything he did. That took surprisingly few tries. Alright, cool. I was expecting that to be tougher than Grim. Not to worry, because next we have a very special fight. We're gonna head back upstairs. No, we're not. This is downstairs. Hang on. Where is this? Oh, here it is. Ah. Umu. Now, Umu is probably the most different any bosses that we've faced up here in Godhome have been. Only 50 more HP, but now packing a new attack, that being Summon Umas, which I'll jump ahead to him doing. Here it is. He lets out a roar and summons 2, I believe occasionally 3 Umas to come up from the acid below. Obviously really easy to dodge, just don't attack them and they move in a straight line from the bottom to the top, but By this point, you should probably notice a second attack, or a second major difference between this fight and the last. And that is that Quirrell is not here. But Umu still has the same properties that he did back when we fought him at first, which is he can't be damaged until we hit him with something besides a spell or our nail. And in this case, that is the explosions of the Umas. And these guys have always been a bit unwieldy, and it can be extremely difficult to get them lined up to take on the big guy. You can use the fact they home back in, or you can hit them directly into the shell, but either way, you have to get that explosion to hit the Uma, or to hit Umu. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to finish this fight. But no time to breathe, because on Ascended, things get even more difficult. The acid down at the bottom has been replaced with a bottomless pit, which makes avoiding the electricity that much more difficult. Yeah! Alright, there we go. Now, on the bright side, the damage that the Umas actually do is pretty significant when they hit him with the explosion. So even though he does have a fair bit of health, using the big explosions can help the boss fight go relatively quickly. However, this is definitely one of the more difficult ones. It's sort of like a puzzle. Oh, shoot, that didn't work. Did it work? No? Yes? Okay. I think I hit him, and then didn't hit him with the second one. That was strange. Oh, this guy's right below, right below. Here we go. Nice. Good boomerang, good boomerang. Excellent. Okay. Only took one hit there. That wasn't too bad. Honestly, I think this is awesome. Umu, like I said, is probably the least boss-like boss in the entire game, since you basically just have to wait for someone else to fight it for you. This is a lot more proactive, but in combination with the lack of floor, this ends up being one of the more difficult boss fights to Radiant. But the key here is patience. Now, if you do want, you can get a little bit of extra spell at the start of the fight with the Dream Nail right here, by jumping up to that platform. Not entirely necessary, but can be helpful, since the Shade Souls can definitely help in hitting the Umas, like so, which will cause him to fly back and hit a platform. Almost got him pretty well there, but unfortunate. Ooh, this guy's coming up right beneath. Check this out! Alright. And so there are a lot of really good ways that you can use your spells to easily get the membrane out of your way. But no need to get too fancy with it. Uh-oh. Ooh, that was close. Oh, gosh! Ooh. And of course, I do want to point out that, of course, the Umas do double damage. This is actually the first fight, I believe, we fought in Godhome where a fight has different damage values. And of course, the Umas do double on Ascended to doing 4 damage. But it's interesting because it ends up making no difference on Radiance. When everything's infinite, it doesn't matter if something does more damage or less. It's the great equalizer. Not too shabby. Alright, and what's our final boss of this episode? Flip the lever on Hornet's statue, and we'll find Hornet Sentinel, the iteration of her we fought way back in the Kingdom's Edge. Now, she's not too different. Obviously, like many bosses, she does have the extra HP, but in my opinion, the biggest change that they make, even on Ascended, is the background here. It is a lot more colors and a lot more just animation going on. And you know how I was mentioning I have like some color blindness problems with the this one with the spike weave? Well, here it's even worse. It can be really hard to tell where these are if you're not actively paying attention to them. But if you can get past that, she's not too much of a problem. 1200 HP on Ascended can cause issues, of course. What's with the double counters, Hornet? You did that last fight, too. But, as long as we are just ever so careful about doing our damage between her maneuvers instead of during. Or, during instead of between. Listen. Careful. Then we should be able to pull this off just fine. She is countering a lot. She must not like me in her space here. We do have the Shade Cloak now, which does give us slightly more leave to hang out in her personal space than we did before. But I wouldn't recommend being too greedy with it. And I'm more so taking advantage of our Mark of Pride now than I was. And having the ability to hang out outside of her melee hitbox. Only took one hit there, that bodes well for Radiant. As for my personal memories with this fight, when I first played this game on the Switch and was doing this Radiant fight took me a long time. And to be completely honest, I had no idea there was input lag in the Switch version, because I'd never... Actually, ironically, I had played the Steam version by that point, but I didn't remember it well enough to be able to tell the difference. But, even though I wasn't consciously aware of the input lag, I believe this fight was the first one where I was really starting to feel it. Stop doing that! Ah! She doesn't usually counter twice in a row. That feels extremely rare. Oh, shoot. Of course, she's not worth underestimating. She still is blisteringly fast. And having basically no cooldown between any of her attacks does still make her an extremely potent opponent. Ooh, not bad at all. Okay, and that's gonna do it here. Perfect, perfect, perfect. We have got all these beautiful golden blobs all over the place, which is wonderful. We're about 3/4 of the way through these guys here. Still missing a couple of bosses, but in the next episode we'll find at least one of those at a Pantheon's Peak. See you guys then.